coworkers, classmates, as well as a special thank you to Lisa. Thank you for attending this morning and for your review of my thesis proposal for today. As all thesis proposals go, there's updates that occur occasionally. So what you actually see in the title on the actual slide is slightly different. It's actually evolved into something different. The Golden Dragon Partnership, increasing China's foreign direct investment into Washington State's Puget Sound region. The Puget Sound region within Washington State includes Seattle as well as the outlying area. And what we're looking at is what we found is that specifically within China along foreign direct investments, and we'll cover that in a bit of what FDI actually is actually surprisingly low within the area. So why, there's two studies that we're going to do. Why is it actually low within particularly with Washington State, as well as are there specific ways to actually implementations that we can do from a government level to actually increase this investment that we have here. So we'll go immediately into, well, what is foreign direct investment? You look at FDI is a direct investment into production in a country by a company located in another country, either by buying a company in the target country or by expanding the operations. So what it is essentially it's foreign investment, but it's a very specific type of foreign investment. You're looking at the investment of they go into another country where they'll either buy the assets or they'll create a new company. Think, for example, of you get a lot of the finance companies. HSBC is a good example where they're based out in the UK, but they'll do but they'll have operations elsewhere. A lot of US firms do this, and actually a lot of Chinese firms will do this as well. Some of the numbers that we found in terms of the research as well, in terms of some of the things, is there's quite a lot that's been actually discussed about FDI because it's been there since, as well as from the late 1800s or so. Some of the things that they always talk about is there's a nationalism, an issue that they have with, well, what happens if you're, for example, working with protecting certain assets, as well as especially if you're looking at oil or other things in particular. In addition, there's obviously certain government interventions that can be done. What we've seen is the entire gamut of people not allowing trade at all for this type of investment, where they're worried about they're going to take oil stakes, for example, elsewhere, or actually fully permitting FDI. Some of the things that you'll see in examples is you get special economic zones, you get tax incentives, you get infrastructure subsidies, you get a lot of different environments that the governments can do to assist this. So let's look at the US and China as a whole. So in terms of US overall investments, it's actually one of the largest that we've seen globally. Total investments overall have accounted for about $2 trillion in overall FDI into the US. US accommodates probably about 30% of the total market of investments, as well as over 30% outside to other countries as well. Surprisingly, 80% comes from 8 countries, Switzerland, UK, these countries as a whole. But surprisingly, China is actually not in this market, even though it's one of the largest trading partners. So why is that? FDI in China is also, it's also readily available. It's actually known as RFDI, renminbi, foreign development investments. Second largest market right after the US. So why isn't this the case within Washington State? So let's go into a little bit of details within Washington State. In terms of, compared to other states, Washington has not been as successful. It's actually the 29th within the country. One of the research firms, the Puget Sound Regional Council, writes, given the state's very strong trade position and sophisticated manufacturing services base, this foreshowing is somewhat surprising. Some of the statistics that you have is that Washington State is China's largest trading partner, $6 billion that heads out to China every year. China with the US does approximately $11 billion. If you add Hong Kong, it's another $2 billion as well. Some of the key exports that you see of why they're doing it is you're looking at the aircraft, you look at software, particularly those are some of the key industries, as well as agricultural products. Washington apples, which is actually larger than the New England market, as well as almond rocas, which you actually have here, so you can sample some of the Washington State products. So with a lot of those, and in particular, you're looking at within Washington State or within Puget Sound, so we can focus on particularly the tech industry. You're looking at, obviously, there's a history of manufacturing with Boeing, a lot of the high-tech aerospace. There's been some of the FDI, there's Microsoft, Expedia, Starbucks, Amazon, Costco. T-Mobile is actually also located here as well. So there's quite a lot of investments into the companies. is that the FDI has been done, but it's not done at a large scale. You're looking at some of the examples that we do have within the region. Nintendo Americas is based within the Redmond area. There's also recently iSoftScope, a software company based out of China that's actually decided to expand operations within the Kirkland area. So you look at, there's a lot of potential synergies that are here, that are in place. We're looking at within the Washington State focus, you're looking at, obviously you want to do the high tech, the aerospace industry, information technology. However, a lot of the reasons why you would do foreign direct investments is obviously you have the incentive to be able to learn from the other countries, especially particularly from China, and why it's doing so. So what we're going to look at in the initial questions is, particularly going back to, why is the Chinese FDI investment so low in the Washington State? Are there specific incidents before previously that affect us? For example, CNOC in 2005, I believe, tried to purchase a petroleum company down in California, but Congress decided to vote against this. Is that some of the issues that we're looking at play? Are there other specific issues, specifically with Washington State? Is the Chinese companies not familiar with this, for example? And then from there, we're going to take on what can be done to increase the Chinese foreign direct investments within Washington State? Are there specific key takeaways that we're looking at from other manufacturing industries? Toyota, the Honda, the auto manufacturing being a key example. Are there key takeaways from that? And then are there specific things that can be done within at a specific city level or at a state level, additional tax incentives, additional things, government interventions that can come into assistance? So what we're proposing over the next couple of weeks is refining, extending the existing body of knowledge around FDI. Really, there's a lot of work that's done around what FDI is, but is there things specifically done around what are the issues specifically around the West Coast and around Washington State? We're looking at also a specific analysis of the different foreign policy levels. Finally, some of the proposals that we're going to come at the end of this thesis is to come up with a recommendation on what can be done at the state level at Washington State, as well as down all the way down to certain city levels. A city like Redmond that has the manufacturing facilities of Boeing, what can it do to go speak with Chinese companies to attract additional FDI investments? So what we're proposing in the next upcoming weeks or so before the final December thesis proposal review is obviously there's additional work here, as well as developing the final thesis scope. Some of the key stakeholders I've listed, about 35 to 40, are listed here. Completing the literature review, hypothesis development that we've listed earlier for questions, and then finally setting our questions to talk to our companies, as well as specific government officials, and then coming up with our initial proposal. So at this point, appreciate your time again, and at this point, we welcome your time, and we appreciate your feedback on any things to help Washington State. Thank you. So if there's no questions, we'll just move on to the I do welcome your feedback. This is going to be very important for the next couple of weeks.
All those slides.
Oh, these are some of the
Extra ones.
extra ones.
You're going after you, thank you.
Is it this one for the next one? Okay.
I guess my comment is I appreciate this kind of like really comprehensive look at this particular investment strategy in Washington State, and I mean particularly understanding how this sort of global scale investment is going to potentially impact a smaller place, right? My only question is that if obviously you're at the very start of the research, so the research is going to yield lots of information, and so if you don't understand yet why there's more Chinese FDI in Washington State, I don't know that part of the thesis proposal can be recommendations for increased Chinese FDI. I mean, it makes sense that that's one of the questions, but I'm starting to think, I'm wondering if maybe you can be a little bit open-minded in what the research might produce for you, because the research might come to some conclusions that it's not necessarily about increased Chinese FDI, but something about what kind of Chinese FDI is going to come in, or something about the relationships between the kind of investments that come in and the particular corporations that they might relate to, right? So I think that there's just kind of a couple of layers of complexity or nuance that might come out of the research that might change what the sort of final recommendations might be, or even what the final recommendations are geared towards. So I would just sort of encourage a little bit more open-endedness kind of going into it to allow whatever whatever strategy, to allow whatever strategies may come out of the research questions to emerge on their own.
Mhm. That's great. I think one of the issues I always ran into previously was it's certainly about scope. When you look at, initially, you look at the evolution, it starts with economic development, but that's such a broad swath. You're looking at overall investments into Washington State, it's such a wide swath. But I think that's, hence the reason I said that, let's place a point on the ground first, and let's develop a hypothesis there. But in terms of being open from the research, I think that's absolutely
Well,
valid.
I mean, of course, a hypothesis is necessary, but as you were talking through everything, I mean, the main question I had kept thinking was, well, if there seems to be such a prime sort of investment situation, how come it's not happening?
Absolutely.
Right? So, I mean, obviously there's going to be sort of very complex answers to that question. And so I'm really interested to see what those answers might be, but it might not lead towards increasing investment directly, to be honest. I mean, of course, in some ways it's sort of a no-brainer that would be the goal. But I think it could be interesting to think about the ways it might suggest a different kind of investment or certain nuances around the investment.
That's great. Thank you.
I want to say something. I think I agree with many of the things said. And I think definitely the investigating public-private partnerships with foreign partners and why they work and why they don't is so relevant today. Really relevant today. And I think it's a very good way to go. I would think, in addition to zooming in specifically, think about the market failure. What's the market failure? Because something's not working in there. I mean, Chinese markets find their way to work, and Seattle seems to be, and Washington seems to be a very natural place for them to invest. Because of all the data we've shown. What's the market failure then? And then I would actually map what are the benefits or the complexities of the foreign direct investment there, because they are part of the picture you're trying to draw. And making a case for this as a beneficial process to this place seems to me, yes, we think it's a no-brainer, but the market failure there suggests that some people don't feel like that. So
Absolutely.
I devoted part to that, justify that.
Actually, there's in terms of FDI research from the benefit standpoint, there's actually some theories that have been done that have shown there's a lot of benefits in terms of you're looking at synergies in terms of learning about technologies, cross technologies, special about this industry, as well as you're looking at salary increases. Typically, it's about 30% more than they've actually demonstrated, as well as demonstrated increased trade. Some of the things actually you've been talking about for market failure, it's actually there's several different aspects of things. You're looking at is it a Guanxi issue actually? Is it because China has always been familiar with working in the Vancouver market in Canada as well as the San Francisco or Los Angeles market? Is that actually one of the possibilities? It's one of the hypotheses that we're looking at.
So what's hindering the process is a very important question. And then why this doesn't happen, what are the factors that stop it from happening? It's a slightly different question.
That's great. Thank you.
I guess one comment would be that I think that the rhetoric, the kind of mode in which you present is very kind of feels kind of like you have a client. I don't know what your
He
background
does.
is.
You are my clients.
No,
But-
I don't know whether are you from Washington State? And
But they want you, I mean,
Oh.
describe
Because-
also who you are.
Right.
Because you also said we, which
Yeah,
is,
right, exactly.
so at least tell.
So I am, as I said before, I'm a second year planning student here, but I'm actually also a city councilman in our city in Washington State. So one of the things that we're focusing on is
Yeah.
particularly economic
Right,
development.
yeah, that's great. I think it's useful to put that forward. But I also think, given that that's the case and that there's really kind of pragmatic, specific agendas that you have, I also think that within the context of a thesis, it is, maybe following up some of the things that Jenna was saying too, is that it is really important that you still situate the problematic in a more general way, I think. Like to understand why, number one, just introducing yourself allows us to understand why you're focusing on Washington State. But being able to provide maybe slightly more information about a comparison between neighboring states, because it did really feel like it was hard to ground your interest I do think, I feel like I kind of need to know a little bit more at what's at stake. Like I think because you're positioning it as an obvious positive thing, it's investment, one thing to consider would be that maybe the reason that investment isn't happening is because something else is at play that might also be kind of beneficial to other parts of the population. So I think I think it's really important to, maybe I'm just talking about tone or kind of the language that you use, but I think that allows you not only to kind of communicate what's at stake to the critics or the conversation that you set up, but also to allow yourself to be critical of your own agendas at the same time.
No, that's great. I think some of the things I didn't include earlier is that the entire West Coast is actually low in terms of FDI.
Right.
So California, even though it's higher in terms of total amount, but as a comparative percentage to the rest of the GDP or the actual trade within California, it's actually low in that regard. And then some of the other factors that we're also considering is that there's a lot of transportation projects that are coming into place. Does that pose another hindrance within the Puget Sound region? There's several $billion, but that affects obviously traffic patterns. That's going to affect how people drive or their perceptions of the area, and how does that actually affect that? It'd be great to compare that with other areas, San Francisco, Los Angeles, the entire West Coast. Thank you.
My comment, I think, will be following what has been said. I think perhaps a suggestion would be in your presentation, what's perhaps lacking perhaps at this stage, maybe you will cover that later, is specific examples. Examples that allow you not only to draw cross comparison as comparative studies between areas, cities, or even regions that are successful, but I think examples that could concretely figure out certain spatial issues, because I think within spatial issues we could also locate certain cultural and political nuances that are tied to economic consideration. You mentioned Guangxi, right? That is super important in the way in which China sees the way in which they invest elsewhere or invest within. And that actually has large spatial implications, right? It's also affected by the way in which the city is formed, the way in which even the physical structure of the city is going towards. So I wonder if you could find very concrete examples to enable you to, almost as it were, working from the details upwards. Because I think what you have presented is on a very large global scale without the specificity that allows you to enter the problem directly.
That's great. Some of the examples we're looking at, they say that the largest FDI investors are from Europe, and then the largest states that actually do FDI investment are over on the East Coast. Connecticut, as you said, South Carolina, where you have a lot of the new auto manufacturing plants now. So that, as you said, there's cultural, there's a spatial element of that as well, which would be great to.
Because let's say, for instance, frontier cities in China, for instance, like Xi'an, for instance, the investment is both ways. And because it was able to flow both ways, both regions of investment were successful, started from the late 19th to early 20th century, the tie between, let's say, Xi'an and Southeast Asian cities. So perhaps you may want to look at that.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments?
Again, you and I will talk later. And of course, you're developing it. You're very much at the beginning still, which is fine. But I mean, I look at complete the first literature review. Well, that's why you don't know the literature yet. Complete your hypothesis development. We're helping with that. Complete it. So it's all. I mean, I think it's a really interesting topic. I still don't know whether there's a problem or not, which is really what everybody's been saying in different ways. Is there a problem that there's no Chinese investment here, or are you just sort of a lobbyist for, getting Chinese investment here? And the next thesis presenter will be a lobbyist for getting Japanese investment here, and then the next one will be for India. Although that's further away, that's tougher. It's sort of that kind of quality. And I don't know that maybe there's no market failure at all. I mean, they're just not investing here because it's a market success. I mean, there's no reason to invest here. I don't know. We don't know. It just sounds like it would be good to get some of that Chinese money over here, good for Washington State and good for a politician. So I think that's the flavor. Nonetheless, I think it's very, very interesting. I mean, you're exploring, a specific country, that's fine, it's case-oriented, and you're trying to figure out, are there things that Washington State could do differently? Other states could do the same thing. Are there things that the United States could do differently that might encourage, economic development in the United States? And of course, we're a spatial physical school, so we're hoping to see that kind of thing as well. I mean, maybe you'll create this wonderful corridor along Puget Sound that's a physical corridor, but also a legal corridor. Some special thing that you'll invent. You'll have to get approval from, the United States government as a whole, because foreign is not just what a city or a region or a state can do, but there are national implications, et cetera. So it's wildly interesting and good, and I'm looking forward to moving beyond the developing the final thesis scope stage to the sort of next conversation.
I think one of the things you do bring up, and it was brought up earlier, I think it's that the automatic bias in terms of what my background is. So it's that in that ability for people, can you actually, can I actually come up with an unbiased, a rational review of the thesis? It's almost maybe Washington State isn't as, because of my background. So it's more, do we look at the West Coast or do you look at other cities as well?
There's one point, I really agree with that. I don't know if it was on an earlier slide where one of the many things you were going to do was just to look to kind of understand the political and cultural and environmental conditions that make that happen or not happen, and all this is very spatial. And I just feel like that, as a thesis, to come back to really understand that issue and then to return to your role gives you so much strength. As opposed to trying through this year to solve, to figure out exactly how to make that happen, to actually understand the conditions that then, I know that's two theses, but I just feel like you have time now to really understand those conditions in a way that you wouldn't if you weren't doing this program. So it's an exciting opportunity.
Any other? If not, thank you for your time. Appreciate it.
Thank you.